Hey everybody, Red Mage here. Welcome back to this series where I go through different RPG products that I have and give them a quick flip through and review. In this video, I'm going to be going through 3 great supplements for GMs. These are all going to be very useful and they have some practical, immediate value. They all either have tables or examples, things that you can use directly in your games right away. But they all 3 also do a lot on the side of philosophy, game design, and making you think about the way that you approach your games or thinking in terms of patterns or archetypes, and that's really, really helpful. So I'm going to be going through Dungeon Design Patterns Volume 1 by David Tippy. I'm going to be going through Home by Scott Wagoner, and I'm going to be covering the ICRPG Game Mastery book, which was just released by Runehammer Games. All 3 of these are excellent, but they're all of varying sizes, and they all kind of focus on a different thing. So I'll start with this Dungeon Design Patterns, which is by David Tippy. Now, this is only $1 over on TTRPG, and it's not that long of a document. It's only 16 pages, so I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but I'm going to go through a few examples and just give you a sense of what this book is. Essentially, this book contains 12 patterns for use in designing dungeons. There are certain principles, puzzles, or patterns of rooms that may be useful in designing large, explorable spaces. In other words, these are archetypes or patterns that you can take and then apply to your own dungeons or your own games more generally. They're ways of thinking about the layout or the approach to your dungeon. Sometimes it's a matter of mapping things, but very often it's a matter of particular elements that you're going to include and tensions that you want to add into your dungeon. So I'm going to be going through just a few of them, but I really recommend this book to everybody because it's a great book and it makes you think about things in a pretty cool way. Even if you end up looking through this and you're like, yeah, I actually kind of already do this, for 1 or 2 or maybe 4 or 5 or 6 or, however many of them that you're like, oh yeah, actually I have done this for my own dungeons already. It's really helpful to be able to kind of see it laid out and to think about it and to put a name to it. That makes it stick in my mind and make me go back to it more consciously and intentionally when I want to use them in the future. So first we have the Dragon Bridge. This is a great pattern, right? It's pretty straightforward. You have a very obvious big bad evil thing blocking your path and blocking the path to obvious progress. And then you have a couple other side paths which are less known, maybe less obvious, and are less directly going to lead to the solution. But they are both options, and the players know that they are both options. And either of them will allow you to bypass or flank the danger, but there will be their own, there will be some problems by choosing either of those. So I'll put it in David's terms. A pattern in which the obvious path forward is blocked by an overwhelming danger or is otherwise impassable. 1 or more less obvious side paths are provided, allowing players to bypass or flank the danger. Why you might use this pattern: to disguise a linear path, to force players to take danger seriously, to justify a stealth section, to include a cool monster that's way stronger than your player characters, and to let your players come up with interesting outside-the-box solutions to dangers and problems. Tips and notes. Don't use this pattern to railroad your players onto the side path. If they come up with a sensible way to deal with the danger on the main path, let them. Try and provide 2 side paths if you can. And then there are some examples, right? A bridge over a moat is blocked by a huge dragon, quite literally. Or a large enemy base blocks the main entrance into a dungeon, or the main mine entrance is guarded by a team of soldiers. In any of those cases, you can see, well, we got to get in there, right? We got to get into the castle, and there's just a big dragon on the moat. Okay, well, the players are like, well, we march up to the dragon and fight it. All right, that's their choice. You're going to get smoked, but you could try it. Or the players can be like, okay, well, how are we going to get past this dragon? Great. Well, that'll allow them to be creative and to think of the tools that they have and their player abilities and what their environment's like, and that's all cool too. But then there are also these alternative paths, other ways of approaching the dungeon that are maybe, again, a little less obvious, but I would say, making them clear that they are options to the players is an important thing, right? If you make them super obvious, then it looks like that's the main way. But if you provide enough information that there might be another thing that they can find if they go hunting, well, then that will reward exploration. So I think this is a fantastic idea. And the more you think about it, the more you think about it, right? The more other ideas come to mind and the more you start to riff on this. And I think this is fantastic, especially when you start to combine these things one with another. So here's number 2 and number 3, and I'm just going to go through these first 3. The map room. This is a really brilliant one. Perhaps the most important pattern. A map room is any room that gives players more information about the larger layout of a dungeon than simply what is contained in the neighboring rooms. This can be a room containing a literal map, but it can also be a room with many windows into other rooms, a room with an NPC who will describe the overall layout of the dungeon, or a high vantage point that overlooks many other rooms. That's a really cool idea, right? So you go into a dungeon, and fairly early on, and that's what the tip says, try to put this room early on in the dungeon, but don't give the players the entire layout. So early on in a dungeon, you come across a quote-unquote map room, and that might mean literally there's a map of the dungeon carved into the wall. It might mean that a dead adventurer is, almost made it out and he died right there, and his partially completed map is on the floor in his pack. But it also might mean there's an NPC who can describe a few rooms ahead, or there's a big window that overlooks the cavern and you can make out the shapes of various points of interest down there in the cavern. Maybe it's a magic mirror that lets you view rooms of the dungeon, or from a distance, or a magic eye that lets you scry particular parts of the dungeon. Whatever it might be, you can immediately start to think about things. You immediately start to, I think, riff on this once again. Like, you get this idea of, okay, maybe there is a map that populates once you've been to a part of the dungeon. Or maybe there's a map that shows you where generally the monsters are, or some particular monster. That would be really cool, right? Say you enter like a labyrinth, and there's a very obvious or a really complex map, and you can see this little figure moving around on the far side of the labyrinth from where you are. And you know that as soon as you leave the room, you're not going to be able to see it anymore. So you have the layout, and you know where it was moving, and if you stay right there, you can see where it moves. But, things like that. Anyway, I think stuff like that's really cool. Okay, how about the number 3, the avenue? Another key pattern. The avenue is a room or corridor that spans the width of a dungeon or dungeon floor. It can also be used vertically as a shaft that spans multiple dungeon floors. So this is the idea of the dungeon highway, right, that cuts through the dungeon. And you say, well, why would you use that? And I think a lot of people do use that. You see that on a lot of really good dungeons. You see that on a lot of good dungeon maps. Well, here are some interesting thoughts about that, right? So what does it do to add an avenue into your dungeon? Well, it's a simple way to give players a large amount of information on the layout of the dungeon. You know that there's at least this one big path through. It helps them navigate the dungeon quickly, right? So you always know that there's one way through. It makes it easier to describe the overall layout of the dungeon, so you can talk about things in reference to the avenue. And it can give you a buffer zone between factions. That's a really cool idea, right? This major hallway is where you're going to find a conflict between factions, but once you leave it and go into a particular quadrant, well, then that's when you're going to meet this quadrant's faction or that quadrant's faction. It's a helpful way of breaking it up. It doesn't have to be a straight line, as he points out. It can be an underground river or a vein of metal or a huge abyss or a body of water. But it's easily traversable. And maybe you can't immediately get into it, or maybe you can get into it, but you can't get into all of the areas that it leads to until you take these side paths and unlock doors and things like that. And in that sense, it feels much more like like Metroidvania or something like that, where you can run the length of the castle, but you pass by a bunch of doors that you can't open up on this side of them. So you know that there's a lot of different places you can get to, and that when you do the loop, you'll eventually connect back to this place, but you can't go through the door from this side. Like, that's a really cool idea. And again, it's something that you start to think of when you think about things like this in this way, by naming them and actually thinking about them as a pattern and as a type, rather than just kind of ad hoc throwing stuff together. Anyway, I really recommend you guys go check out this whole book by David Tippy, Dungeon Design Patterns Volume 1. As soon as I saw it, I picked it up and I was not disappointed, and I can't wait for Volume 2. I hope that there's Volume 3. I hope it just keeps coming, because I think these are really, really cool. Next, I want to cover Home. Now, Home is a very different kind of product, but it does make you think about overworld games in a very different way. Hex crawl, sandbox style play in a very different way. At least it did for me. Home is designed as a toolkit for creating a sandbox adventure that centers on a community that grows and develops alongside the PCs. So in other words, this is something that you use this toolkit to create a region and a steading, and you have that steading grow alongside of the player characters as they level up by getting more resources and having more NPCs move there, And it's sort of like, well, as it says here, a combination between Keep on the Borderlands and Animal Crossing, or Stardew Valley, or, something more like Harvest Moon or something like that. It's a really funny idea. It's not that it's a farming simulator or something like that. And it's very clear that the resource gathering development side of things can be hand-waved, or you can do as much of that or as little of that as you're interested in doing. But what I think is so cool about this book is the way that it makes you think about your sandbox, the area that you're starting with, as well as all of these additional kinds of rules, like resource management at a steading level, or item slots in a very particular way. How sandbox play can work here, the way that you deal with factions and faction clocks, and lots of different ways of running a hex crawl that isn't the exact standard way that we might have done it before. So this is a really cool supplement to just read through and to kind of think about. Now again, this is for any game, really. It's good for any GM from any game, but it is designed for first tier of play, quote unquote, in the world's most popular role-playing game, right? So really what that means is level 1 through 5 in D&D 5e. But don't let that push you away if you're not a fan of 5e, because low-level D&D 5th edition is very similar to old school gaming in other games, really. If you haven't played much 5e, then you'll know that the power level and the kind of, it starts to go off the rails by level 4, level 5. This is, when you're really low level, then 5th edition is pretty much like any old school game. It's actually fairly lethal. It was one of the complaints about it by so many people early on. I actually think that's great, because that means this is really, really easy to shift to any game of your choice. So the fact that it's 5th edition really doesn't matter, and it doesn't come up that much in this game. And it says so, or Scott says as much in his overview here, that you're dealing with a small sandbox, and most of the material is system neutral, and it's very easily modifiable to any fantasy RPG. Now, one kind of totally random thing here is that Scott Wegener is one of the creators, or one of the people behind Atomic Robo, which was a comic that I loved for a long, long time, and I totally stumbled upon this out of nowhere, and I was like, whoa, wait, Atomic Robo, what? And then I went there, I was like, oh my goodness, Dr. Dinosaur is one of my favorite villains of all time. I love Dr. Dinosaur. So I highly recommend you guys go check out that as well. The Atomic Robo is sort of the follow-up to, well, at least by the other creator, to 8-Bit Theater, which I loved as well. 8-Bit Theater was hilarious. Now, I don't think Scott was involved with 8-Bit Theater, but anyway, just funny how things connect. Total tangent. What you get in this book is an overview of hex crawling, how to create a hex crawl. Actually, I'll jump back to the table of contents here, and you see what you get. What it means to have local heroes, how the hex map is built and is designed, why you want an old road, right? Why you want the long river, where to add in the great mountains and the dark forests, and what how to populate those on your map, how travel and time works, who the adversary is, and that's different than the factions, right? The factions, and then faction clocks, you get resources, how to seed the map, the steading itself, shops and services, character advancement, etc., etc. It's a really cool book, and it makes you think about all of these things. It's not too long, it's about 21 pages in PDF form, but that includes a lot of extra stuff at the end, and you're looking here at, well, as it says here, about 37 pages, including the thank you. And much of that is just additional at the end. Here is the kind of, well, here's the layout that you're going to get. Now, it's nothing that's like going to, shock you. There's no crazy art in here. There's no crazy design elements in here where you're like, whoa, this is very straightforward. It's laid out in a very, very clear way. Here's this section on the Great Mountains. Here's how you place them. Simple system to roll. Generating the sandbox is not what really drew me in. What drew me in a lot was this sort of stuff. Factions and faction clocks and how to fill them in. Again, thinking about the goals of the adversary, right? What's the DNA? Description, needs, agenda. DNA, description, needs, agenda, right? That's a way of thinking about your adversary, and you can just, that's going to go into your head. And once you have DNA in your head, then you know every time, okay, I need to create a villain, I just fill out their DNA. And that's really good. Resources and how to develop these resources, what that does for your game. the setting itself and its noteworthy feature, and again, there's some tables there for you can roll on, but also just this idea of generating a setting or an area around a central hub. Now, by the way, the art that you do get in this book, it's not every page, but it is really good. It makes sense. Scott Wagner is an artist, is a comic book artist, and so you get that style, a very stylistic art, and I love it. Unusual geography, setting size. Now, here I'll pause a moment to talk about the overall purpose, right? Why would you want to have a setting that develops alongside the party? Well, I think as soon as I say it that way, you might understand why. That's a really cool idea. Do you want to do this for every campaign? No, certainly not. I wouldn't want to do this for every campaign, but I think this would be a great kind of campaign to run, where you start off with a very small setting, and the players are very low level, and you talk to the players about the fact that this is going to be their home. So develop all the NPCs together, develop the setting, make them care about it. And then as they level up and as they explore the region and as they conquer dungeons and unlock certain kinds of resources, then those resources can then be contributing to the setting. And those resources don't have to be, wood or stone. They can be much more complex and powerful and interesting and specific to the particular dungeon that they've just cleared. But I could see combining this basic idea with almost any, hex crawl, West March kind of game. And I think if you took this as a template or as a baseline, it would really go a long way in developing your own. Tons of good ideas, and if you, again, as I said, start with this, but then develop off of it. I mean, my mind is kind of going crazy with the possibilities here. I think you could develop really cool systems, and I'm sure that there are players, GMs, who have done this, right, who have created their own towns and have let their players kind of upgrade, quote unquote, and develop and build new buildings with new services and amenities, and it's kind of like Darkest Dungeon, right? It's something that I have done for my West Marches before on a very small scale. And one time as a player, the party that I was in decided, well, it was really just me and one other player. Our GM, my character, inherited a kind of a desolate town, an old, destroyed town. It was on the edge of the kingdom. And this land that included a castle, an old ruined castle, and some nearby land. And we just spent sessions rebuilding it, getting it up and running, hiring people, allowing, getting the right things so that people would move there, giving farmland out, and coming up with rules for how much land you could keep if you could plow it, and all of these things. And we just spent literally sessions doing this. It was so much fun. I think certain players would love this sort of design and this sort of approach. So anyway, I'm not going to go through the whole thing, obviously, here. It's really cool. It's really, really cool. The art alone is very evocative, but just these procedures, if you're not somebody who has a very well-developed hex crawl procedure or hex generation procedure, then this is also very useful. But the rest of the stuff in here is also quite good. And again, it just makes you think about and sparks your imagination for a lot of the different things that you could do on your own. You could really open things up and develop things. And so this is a good launching point. If this sparks your interest, then I highly recommend you go get home. This is over on itch.io, and I think it's about $5 over there, but I'll put a link below to where you guys can get it. Last but not least, I want to talk about the ICRPG Game Mastery book. This is a little like the first book in that a good portion of this is patterns and ways of thinking about design, ways of thinking about, adventure structure and NPC structure, and just it's very, very high level thinking, which is great, and I love books like that. But it also has a ton of just really useful tables. And you're going to see that lots and lots of D20 tables. Now this is obviously, it's intended for ICRPG, but ICRPG is it's so simple, and I don't mean that in any kind of bad way, that it is easy to adapt to any game of your choice. I mean, things are given in terms that are so useful and usable in any game, and flexible. So even though it is for ICRPG, this is, I think of this almost as system neutral or system agnostic, simply because it's like there's just almost no effort to adapt this to your game of choice, especially since most of this is just neutral stuff. It's just, tables of ideas, names and entries and cool, flavorful stuff, and then a ton of patterns and ways of thinking about adventure design and adventure structure and encounter structure and room design and things like that. Which shouldn't surprise anybody if you know Runehammer. Back in the day, Drunkens and Dragons. His YouTube channel is just full of that. Okay, now there's a good lot of writing in this book, and it's inspiring. That's one of the things that I like about Hankerin's work, is that he's just like, dude, this is so much fun. We get to play one of the coolest hobbies. This is like the coolest hobby. So, get psyched for it. And I think that's, every time I read his stuff, it just gets me excited to run games. So you see that throughout. Okay, here's what you get in the book. We're not even playing ICRPG. It's a mindset to be adapted. Yeah, mindset. Creative boots to the head, session principles, nearsighted world building, establishing shot maps that matter, inevitable monster chapter, people, folk, dungeons with teeth, wife vow, treasure, stuff, things, and loot, a bunch of other tables to ignore. I like it. I like the way that it's laid out here. Very, very cool. The Wizard's Lock. No well-traveler, a confluence of noble solids seen in a disc or glyph of moving geometry, runes in the surround, and concentric rings. This arcane symbol is the gateway of all worlds, the seal and keyhole of many realities. Know its pattern, its turning, its hidden truths. Beyond this mark 10,000 dimensions be kept, and those who pass will be burdened with knowledge. Know well, scholar, a confluence of noble solids, seen in a disc or glyph of living forms, will stand as your waypost and doorway to the infinite. That's so cool. So again, you have a whole bunch of these bolded entries that are just ways of thinking about each of these paragraphs that he's about to give you, things to think about. And one thing I would say is that very often Runehammer challenges your thinking. This is going to challenge your thinking. Hankerin doesn't just say, yeah, let's play the way we've always played and let's keep the games exactly as we've always kept them. No, there is going to be challenge, and there's going to be things that you, I think, disagree with in this book and things that you really agree with that you hadn't thought of before. In that way, I think of it as a little bit like Dungeon World. When I first read the Dungeon World book, I was like, wow, that makes me think of things in a totally different way. I'm not going to do it, but it makes me think of things in a totally different way. And then you turn the page and be like, wow, that's a genius thing. I'm trying to adapt that to my game too. And I think that that's similar with this book. I don't think anybody's going to read this book and just start adapting everything that is said, but I think you owe it to yourself to read it and challenge yourself with some of these ideas here. And think about what really makes your game better. Now, one thing that's really cool is this idea of card thinking, right? Now, Index Card RPG, ICRPG, uses index cards. But the idea of index cards is actually a really, really cool thing. This idea of points or zones, right? You think of cards as, I'm not even going to be able to put it well. Certainly not as well as Hankerin does here. But this idea of anchoring your thinking to concrete things, right? Anchoring your thinking, your adventure, your game, not to nebulous in-between moments. Not to the sort of overall flow and experience of a game, but to like this set piece, this monster, this object, this weapon rack right over here. It works with the room, the dungeon, and then the overall experience of the game too. Anyway, I don't know. Read the book. Go get the book and read the book. I'm going to jump ahead a little bit here. Not jump ahead exactly, but just click through a few things. But you see stuff like this, right? Story structure in ICRPG Core. You have the layout of the index cards as a session of gameplay, and you have these flows, and you have these ways of thinking about, okay, I'm going to start here, and then we're going to move here, and then we have this decision point, and it's going to split. And again, I know that this is not the way that a lot of people play their game. This is not the sort of level of thinking that they want to enter into. And I don't, again, mean that even in a negative way. Some people are like, no, I just don't need to do this. I have a good game. My players enjoy it. I enjoy it. Great. But I think if you're somebody who really likes to think about game design or adventure design, encounter design, and again, those patterns and higher level problems, right? Thinking of things as archetypes or trying to make connections in your thought, it can sound very abstract and kind of philosophical, right? But I think it's very useful to do. And again, just by reading through these things or by thinking through some of these things, you really will challenge I would imagine, you'll challenge your way of thinking about adventure design and structure and things like that. Like this, okay, just this one page, Mastering the Sandbox. Whether it is acknowledged or not, all great role-playing exists in the oft-discussed sandbox style. This should not be overinterpreted as formless or aimless play, map crawling, or disjointed randomness. To the master, it is a metaphor for how players discover the things at stake, pursue their solutions, confront their foes, and open a new chapter with real curiosity and substantive choices. The diagram below outlines a thought map for how players engage with mysteries, gather clues and leads, find their purpose and navigation choices, and meet the enemy head on. You start with a bunch of facts. There's a barrier of information, right? Those facts help you penetrate the barrier of information, and now you have directions. Okay, but those directions have obstacles, and that means we have to overcome those obstacles, and that's the barrier of challenge. And once you overcome those obstacles, you get to the goal, which is another truth, and that can then be a new fact in a new set of facts that now you need to break through to get to a new barrier of information. So, like, again, it's just a way of thinking about it. And I think some people, again, might say, well, that's overcomplicating it. Maybe it is. I don't know if overcomplicating is the word. It is complicating it. But sometimes you do need to see a thing in its complexity in order to name the actual process. And then you go, oh, I see how that works. And now I can boil it back down and use it quickly at the table. Because I think this is a great description of what we all do as players, right? You get a bunch of facts, whether that be where the monsters in the room are, what the description of the room is, and who has how many hit points left, right? Those are all facts that the players gather, and that lets them break through the barrier of information. And then they say, okay, well, now I have some choices. I can go and kill this goblin who's at full health, but he has the bow, or I could go and kill that goblin who's weaker, and he's only, in the front line fighting against the fighter, so it's not as big of a deal if he goes down, right? So you have some directions. Okay, but the problem is I have to swing across the chandelier to get to that goblin, whereas this goblin, if I miss, then it's his turn next and he can hit me. So there's this obstacle. Which can I survive? And then you go and you succeed, and now I have swung across the chandelier and I killed the goblin with the bow. Great, now the situation's changed. The facts have changed. Now the next round begins. And so in a way, every battle is a sandbox, right? You have facts, and then and those facts are put together to give the players options. And then those options, you have to present obstacles for them to use those options, and then you get to the goal. But that's also true at the macro level, right? Oh, here's the map of the region. We know this rumor, and we have found that trace of tracks, and that means we know that we could go to that dungeon, and we'd probably face the goblins and the great dragon. But we also heard we got a call for help from the other people in the other direction, and they mentioned that ooze was bubbling up out of the well. Okay, so we have a whole bunch of facts, and that gives us two clear directions. But the problem is, if we go and deal with the oozy well, well, then those goblins are going to come and burn down the barn. Okay, but if we go and fight the goblins, so everything's about choices, and everything's about obstacles, and everything's about challenge. How are we going to overcome those and then get to the next step? Okay, anyway, just that one page helps you to think about what you're actually doing, and that way you don't go astray when you're designing a sandbox, when you're designing an encounter, or trying to give the players choices. Right? Just random map crawling, right, is formless and aimless. But by providing a series of facts, what you're really doing is helping them see the directions. Okay, I went way too long onto that I needed to go. But I think that's the sort of thing that you do when you read this book. You read a page like this and you go, oh, I see how it works. And then you start to think about the way that you're designing your own games. Am I providing enough facts? Do those facts lead in one direction or in two directions? And, if it's one direction, is it really choices, really? I'm just waiting for the players to gather enough facts so that they know the thing they're supposed to do. Well, that's not very interesting. If, on the other hand, by gathering enough facts, I give them several directions that they can then choose, well, that's great. But if one of those directions has no obstacle to the truth or to the goal, well, then they're going to pick that. So therefore, again, it's not very interesting. So you have to think, it helps you think about the way you're designing things. Anyway, I like that a lot. Okay, I could go on and on and on here, but here you have some session conceptor tables, which is great, right? So the first half of the session, into the fire. immediate pursuit, ambushed, already there, pressing, they're dead, Jim, Avenger, right? Again, these quick, punchy ways of starting off a session as a way of thinking about, right? See the entries listed here as metaphors if needed, right? Just as a way of kicking off your thinking about the ways that an adventure could begin. And again, by reading through a few of these entries, you'll see it's not necessarily literally saying, okay, you have to start with this, but it's a good approach to starting an adventure. And of course, you'll look through these 12 and then say, well, there's got to be more than these 12, right? And that'll help you think about more. I like some of these too, and again, they're flavorful, and they make you think. They're dead, Jim is my favorite, of course, the Star Trek reference there. The session opens with a desolation and death. Take from them their most precious thing, shatter it, and await their energetic response to go. That's great, right? You start the session with the destruction of their village. You start the session with the death of an NPC that they have loved for a long time, or the artifact that they spent so much time getting. Break it. They're going to do something, right? This reminds me of Spoonie's old joke about how to get the players to do anything. You steal from them, right? Doesn't matter if it's just their boots. Steal it from them and you will get them to go wherever you want to do, wherever you want them to go in their quest to find those boots. All right. Well, this book is quite big. By the way, I didn't say it's about 138 pages in PDF form, so it's the biggest of the three by far. This book is just full of great advice, great tables, and that's what you get towards the end, by the way. It's just D20 tables with lots and lots of cool things. Maybe I should flip through some of those just so you guys get a sense. Again, this is not hyperlinked, but that's okay. If you go all the way to the end of the book, you get stuff like this. D20 tables of tomes of legend, D20 tables of minerals, stones, and metals, rare geological phenomena, languages, folklore like heroic folktales, ghost stories, macrofauna aspects, plant and fungal properties. Tons and tons of pages of those too. So if you're interested in more practical advice, you get a lot of that as well. There's also room layouts or like encounter boss fight layouts with descriptors for, challenges the players can have to make an encounter kind of cool. There's stuff like that in there as well. So tons and tons of really practical advice, as well as this higher level philosophical approach, which I really appreciate. So I highly recommend you guys go check out ICRPG, the PDF over on TTRPG. I think it's about $15. In my opinion, it's totally worth it. If you could get it in physical form, I would say that would be great, because then you can read it, when you're going to bed or something like that. And I always remember stuff better when I do. At any rate, highly recommend all three of these. ICRPG's Game Mastery Book, Home, and the Dungeon Design Patterns Volume 1. I'll put a link below to where you guys can get all three. All right, hope this has been interesting, everybody, and I'll see you all in another video.